This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with disability inclusion strategist Debra Ruh. We talk about compliance via innovation when it comes to disability, neurodiversity, the power of brainstorming, creativity in different cultures, and workplace training for millennials. Enjoy this jam-packed episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Debra Ruh. Debra is a global disability inclusion strategist and advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. When told by experts that her daughter Sara, who was born with Down syndrome, would be lucky to push shopping carts at the local grocery store, Debra refused to accept this. Debra's unshakable faith in the power of human potential first led her to create the multi-million-dollar IT firm Tec-Access, an ICT Accessibility firm with the majority of employees being technologists with disabilities. After exiting that business, she started Ruh Global, which focuses on global disability inclusion, digital marketing, and the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. She now consults with governments, corporations, NGOs, and travels the world, inspiring and encouraging others to follow their dreams. Her latest book is called Tapping into Hidden Human Capital: How Leading Companies Improve Their Bottom Line by Employing Persons with Disabilities. And it's my great pleasure to have her on the show today. Welcome, Debra.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate you inviting me.
So share with our listeners, what's going on in your world?
Well, today is we're celebrating the 4th of July in the United States, and we're 240 years old.
Congratulations.
Which probably sounds very young to most of your listeners, but yeah. So I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. I think that there's obviously there's a lot of room in the world for us to do a better job of including everybody in the workforce, and certainly really tapping into the true potential that we all bring to the table. So I'm excited about the conversation.
Absolutely. And before we go any further, I should probably apologize to all Americans listening just now. I apologize on behalf of all British people that we burnt down your White House at one point as well. That was a slight mistake on our part. I believe it's all been rebuilt and everything now. It's just a slight problem on our side. We have our own problems there, as you've probably been watching in the news. So,
yes.
Yeah. So, talk to me about. I mentioned, at the top of the show when you first had your daughter Sara. You were told by experts out there that that she wouldn't have many options. Talk to us about that process that you went through of when Sara was first born to kind of what you're known for now is really being a leader in an advocate for persons with disabilities.
Well, when our daughter was born, and she's 29 years old, and when I was pregnant with her, I guess I'm an optimist, and it never ever occurred to me that something could go wrong. It just never ever occurred to me. And whenever she was born, the doctors didn't tell us anything. And we did not find out till she was 4 months old that there might be a problem. And the doctors were calling it failure to thrive, when a baby doesn't really gain the weight that they should be gaining at the age. And so one of the doctors suspected that maybe she had Down syndrome, which should almost always is found before the baby is born, or certainly right at birth. So it was sort of unusual not to find this out for 4 months. And so when the doctors called my husband and I into a room to deliver this news to us, that our daughter had Down syndrome, I didn't even know what that meant. I had certainly heard of Down syndrome. I had seen people with Down syndrome, but I had never talked to anybody. And we didn't really know what it meant, but the doctor seemed to think it was a very sad, tragic thing that had happened. And so we got, and the doctor that told us, he really was very compassionate. And, he was saying things that he was trying to help us. But at the same time, what do you say to parents, when you just are telling them that the child they think they have is really they're going to have a very different future. And so they said things like she'll be easier to raise than a child with ADHD or ADD, attention deficit disorder. And one of the doctors, because we went to a geneticist, told us that be careful when she's 16, she could get pregnant, which newsflash, almost any girl that's 16 can actually get pregnant. And Sara did not get pregnant at 16. There are actually ways to prevent pregnancy. So, just things that aren't very helpful when you're trying to really wrap your head around what does this mean? What does the future hold for our daughter? So my husband and I decided that, we would do everything we could to give her the best possible chance and to really tap into her abilities. And we decided just to raise her like we would raise any other child. And whenever our daughter hit the middle school here in the United States, we had moved from Florida to Virginia at that point. And we realized that once again, we always knew she was going to be behind, but we thought that she'd at least catch up a little bit. And she really was not reading at all. And she was in the 6th grade here in the United States. And someone on the team of experts suggested, as you had said earlier, James, that she could bring shopping carts in from, Target or Walmart. And I thought, wow, really, that's our reach goal? Because she's still at that point, she was 13. And when you're in special education in the United States, you can stay in our schools until you hit your 22nd birthday. So we still had a lot of time in school left to actually prepare her to work and to be a meaningful part of society. So I started really thinking about what can I do to add to a more positive conversation. I'd actually seen peers around me that had children with disabilities that were suing the school systems here in the United States because they weren't meeting the needs of our children. And I decided, well, that's certainly one way to go, but I thought maybe I'll become part of the solution. And so I created Tec-Access, which you also mentioned, which was a technology firm, and the majority of my employees were technologists with disabilities. I really thought it was such a great idea to create a technology company because I love technology and I know technology, and to actually employ this workforce that many other people were saying really weren't going to add value to the workforce. So I had amazing successes, and gosh, I had some really, really tremendous failures along the way as well. It is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is become an entrepreneur, build a company, keep it sustainable, make sure you have the cash flow to pay your payroll. It's really, really hard to create and maintain a really successful business. And then on top of it, I was trying to prove a point. I wanted it to be a for-profit, to really prove the point that these workers with disabilities could add value and that it could be a competitive advantage. But sorry for the really long answer, but I just took you through a bunch of years.
No, I mean, it's great. What you were saying there as well, now with the technologies that we have now in terms of social media, it's much easier to bring groups of people, communities together online. And I know you have a very strong kind of use of Twitter as well, and it's one of the tools you use to do that. Back when you were first starting, what was it like trying to bring together all these different stakeholders, parents, persons with disabilities themselves, companies, organizations, government? What was that like initially when you got started?
Well, what was interesting about it is that as you're noting, there's so many different stakeholders, and so I started Tec-Access in 2001 when the internet was still in its infancy, and social media hadn't really been born. What social media is about, I think now 11 or 12 years old. So, which is amazing to think about it because social media has changed our world, and so has the internet. But it was interesting because there was so much that I didn't know, having been a corporate employee for my whole career. There were so many things I didn't know. And you have to, as an entrepreneur, you really do have to think differently. There's some skills that are the same, but there's others that you have to really think differently that in some ways didn't really make sense to my brain. And so it was very interesting. And at the beginning, I was so excited about doing this that I pretty much was reaching out to everybody I know saying, do you want a job? Typical entrepreneur there. As opposed to saying, okay, now I need this particular job filled. Let me go and find a qualified person with a disability, because that was important to me, to do this position. I sort of found really great people and built the company around them, which isn't a bad thing, but there was less strategy at the beginning than,
And now, obviously, disabilities is such a big catch-all word, and I know you also work with not just people that have been maybe born with disabilities, but also with wounded warriors, maybe people that are returning from places of war, whether as soldiers or they've been victims of conflict, and also with baby boomers who are getting disabilities for the first time. That sounds a bit kind of interesting, how those groups are starting to come into your world and kind of what you're doing as an advocate of persons with disabilities.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there have been studies done that say that if you look at all the people with disabilities, only 20% of them are born with disabilities, like my daughter. My daughter was born with Down syndrome. She has an extra chromosome. It's really how she was made at birth. And so but when a person acquires a disability, that's a whole, there's a whole other series of things that have to be done. And I've talked to, and as you note, there's a lot of reasons why people acquire disabilities. And I don't say that in that, ooh, be careful, you're going to get a disability. It's not meant that way. But what I always try to say is that disabilities, they're really part of life. We live in these fragile bodies, and we can be cut, we can get germs, we can get sick, we can age, all the things that make us really amazing. And so I get to work with people that have acquired disabilities as they've aged, or because of car accidents, or because of I was talking to on stage with a gentleman a couple of months ago. He was cutting down some limbs on a tree. The tree, one of the limbs fell on him, and he's not sure if he's ever going to be able to walk again. Right now, he's in a scooter, and he's just not sure what his life is going to be. But that doesn't mean that his life is over and that he cannot add value to the workforce or to society. It just means now he might have to get around in a different way. And so I'm trying to spend a lot of time to have people think about our potential. What do we bring to the table? We all have abilities. We all have disabilities. As we age, in the United States, according to our AARP, which is our American Association of Retired Persons, which is a very, very large organization in the United States, they have done studies that said after the age of 65, 46% of Americans are going to become disabled, according to our Americans with Disabilities Act. So what does that even mean? Well, the reality is, as an employee works for you, if you're looking at this from an employer's perspective, the reality is that they're going to be touched by disabilities. A child, a parent, themselves, a very close friend. So we've got to take away some of the fear associated with this topic. And it's just looking at people as individuals and looking at the whole of the person. And deciding, once again, what can they contribute if given the right tools? So it's a very different way of looking at things, I think. So go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, so on that note, if we think now about, I definitely felt there was a sizable change, certainly here in the UK, when we had, I think it was maybe the Paralympic Games, not the one in the UK in London, the one previous to that. There just seemed to be things kind of going up a stage, in terms of the visibility of Paralympians, and then you've got things like Invictus Games as well, the Wounded Warriors. So in those kind of places, it's moved from being where disabilities are seen as something to deal with related to compliance, making sure the sports stadiums are compliant and they have ramps and all that kind of stuff, to actually seeing what is possible, what the human is possible, what their potential is. When it comes to you working with organizations, how do you move from that stage of just, corporate leaders thinking about persons with disabilities as a compliance issue to actually thinking about a human, a human potential issue and an innovation? The fact that these workers have huge innovative potential and they're lots of kind of creative ideas that maybe aren't necessarily being tapped at the moment.
I love the questions that you're asking, James. And I want to point out that, especially after what just happened in the UK with, y'all exiting the European Union. And of course, the UK and the United States was, that's where we came from. We're celebrating our birthday today, but we came from England. So many of, that's, so it's interesting because if you look at this from the compliance angle, I think in some ways the United Kingdom has done a better job than the United States. Now, what's interesting about this topic from the United States from the compliance perspective, and the UK is looking at this at compliance too, but I see as I wrote my book and I studied what are corporations doing all over the world, and I did not want it just to be a snapshot from the United States, because there's a lot of work going on with this in the United States. But I felt that it would be a better book if I looked at what is happening globally. So in the UK, for example, there's been some amazing successes. There's still a ton of work to do, but there's been some really, really interesting successes coming out of UK with some of your biggest corporations really, truly understanding that, diversity and neurodiversity and making sure that people with disabilities are fully included, because it makes a lot of good business sense. We've seen a lot of really interesting innovations and strategies coming out of the UK. In the US, we're still very, very focused on this from a compliance lens, and we actually are so embedded in our compliance that what we do in the United States, and people will say to me often, "You Americans," and I think, oh gosh, here we go. But we're colorful people, that's for sure. But it's very interesting, to live in the United States. But the reality is that how we do things in the U.S., and I'm not arguing whether or not this is right or wrong, it's just the way we do it. We put laws on our books, and then to comply to those laws, we sue each other. And so the lawsuits over these compliance issues in the United States, they are everywhere. We have never seen the number of lawsuits that we're seeing. They are just, there are estimates that since just 6 months, that we've had at least 25,000 lawsuits in the United States over inaccessible websites, inaccessible HR systems, not hiring people with disabilities, not accommodating people with disabilities, not preparing them for the workforce. I mean, the lawsuits are just rampant. And our laws, if you look at our Americans with Disabilities Act, we're in July now, and we just celebrated our 26th anniversary of our Americans with Disabilities Act. And so this is not new stuff. We have, as legislatively, we have told our employers, and employers in the biggest sense of the word, the agencies, the nonprofits or the NGOs, the corporations, all of our employers, that they have to include people with disabilities in their workforce. But now we have all this litigation that's happening to force it to happen. But what is interesting with that is those lawsuits, they're actually driving change in the United States and inclusion, and we're seeing it impact other countries, including the UK. I remember we had sued Target.com in the United States a few years ago, and they're like, oh, the laws are gray, they're hard to comply with. And so they were sort of pushing back on it. Then it turned into a class action lawsuit, which is really bad in the U.S., and they started complying. Well, I saw a really interesting study media coming out of the UK on BBC, where a reporter was buying a book, and they said to the reporter, go out and buy this book from Amazon. And so the reporter went out and bought the book, in a couple of minutes. And then they had a woman in the UK that was blind. And they said, okay, here's what we want you to do. Go and buy this book. And then they watched what she had to do to navigate Amazon at the time. Amazon's become much more accessible now, but at the time, and that almost trended in the United States as we were looking at the comparisons. It took her about 20 minutes. And after it was all said and done, she was not able to check out and buy the book. Now, once again, Amazon is really a leader in this, employing people with disabilities now and making sure their products and devices are accessible. But it is interesting how we're all learning from each other. So the compliance word, I really wish that we would move more to looking about innovations. How does this, if disabilities, which it is just a normal part of our lives, it doesn't mean that a person becomes disabled for whatever reason and you just get rid of them. It means this person still has value. They still have intellectual capital that's good for you. They're still an individual. It's just maybe you have to accommodate them a little differently. And accommodating people isn't always about disabilities. Sometimes you accommodate an employee because they want to take off Tuesdays at 3:00 and go coach their daughter's soccer game, or they want to take off at 2:00 and go volunteer for soup kitchens because they want to make a difference in the world. So accommodating employees or adaptions for employees, it's just a way of doing business because we are human beings. So
and there's number. In terms of the kind of numbers behind this, I saw one stat. I think it was on your website. Which kind of blew me away, which was the size of this potential market of persons with disabilities who they're just, if companies actually really start to innovate and build their products and their services and their websites and all these kind of different things, thinking about that as well, there's a huge opportunity out there.
Right. And according to the World Health Organization, 1 in 7 people identify as having a disability worldwide. Now, if you look at it from the United States perspective, and I can't quote the numbers in the UK, but I think there's some similar numbers. In the United States, 1 in 5 people identify as being a person with a disability. And that's according to our Census Bureau. So those numbers are staggering. So what I think is also interesting, and one reason why I wanted to write the book, is that we talk about including people with disabilities in your workforce, but many of these employers, they don't realize you already have people with disabilities working for you. If you have probably more than, maybe 7 people. No, but, already people with disabilities are working for many companies. Yeah. But why do the companies not know this? Do the employees feel threatened or embarrassed or scared to let you know that they're an individual with a disability that maybe they have a neurodiversity disability like dyslexia or epileptic or, processing of information? And if they could let the employer know, maybe the employer could just make some little changes. Maybe they're in a very noisy environment and maybe they could take them and keep them in the same area as the rest of their team, but maybe they put them in an office at the end of the row that's a little less noisy and a little less traffic so the person can think better. There's so many different things that you can do to help people be more productive. And at the same time, James, and we talked about this a little bit before we began, but, everything that you're doing is also going to help all of the individuals because, you were talking earlier before we started about introverts and extroverts in brainstorming situations. And I have a tendency to be one of those extroverts that you're going to give the pen to me on the whiteboard and, I'm going to just go away. And my husband is an introvert. And he said to me one time, when you're in a group meeting and everybody's going to go around the table and they're going to tell you their name and who they are, he said, I hate that. Yeah. He said, I dread it coming to me. It paralyzes me with fear. And I thought, it never occurred to me that somebody would think like that, because one of those is like, oh, cool, can't wait for my turn. So the difference in just the way we are as human beings, and how do you take everything we're learning in the innovations and the diversity, and we're showing that, diversity makes corporations more marketable, more productive, more innovative, more creative, and apply it to just, human beings, which, by the way, we all are.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at even previous crashes that we've had in the economy as well, often when they've looked at those things and looked, some of the psychological reasons of boardrooms of why they've failed, it's because they've had just too many people of the same. Just they've not had enough diversity. Female, male, but also just much broader than that as well. So, and also, if there's anyone listening just now, if you're one of those introverts, and you're listening just now, a very quick thing on the brainstorming side is, for many introverts, actually, for many people in general, who don't like that environment, like your husband, of being in that room and having to suddenly feel like they have to perform. Usually can work very well in any kind of brainstorming sessions I do with any companies is that give people what the problem is in advance, that they can kind of work out, think about themselves in their own time, and then when they come in to that room, it gives them the ability to essentially present their thinking, but they don't have to come up with things on the fly, and also just make sure that everyone in that room has a marker pen, has a whiteboard pen and paper and stickies and things like that. There's not one person dominating the room as well. Just quick tip there. Let's go back to you. You're now, obviously, you've spoken at the UN. You're now a published writer as well. Where do you go for your inspiration and for your ideas when where does it start to kind of percolate for you, and how do you go about kind of developing your ideas?
Well, that's a really good question, and one thing. I'm still fascinated with what you're talking about, the brainstorming, because as I have evolved as a person, when I do the group meetings and stuff, being conscious of what my husband said. And also, just one more point. I remember one time I was training a class in Singapore. And so I had some brainstorming exercises in there. And so the first one, I started out and I asked the class a question. And nobody raised their hand. And it was weird because I'm used to, I've trained in all over the world, but usually in the United States or the UK or Europe, people there's going to be somebody with their hand up wanting to make comments. And finally, what my host said, in Singapore, we don't like doing that. We think that's embarrassing for somebody to just hold up their hand and start telling you what they think, because it feels like they're showing off. And so we don't do it that way. What we'll do instead is you can break us into groups and we'll talk about it, but we're not going to raise our hand and just the extrovert in the room is going to start telling you what they think. So it's a cultural thing. Absolutely. Too. Which I had not realized that, nothing like learning. But anyway, I just want to say that. But
you're absolutely right. There's that entire kind of cultural dimension in things as well, and also from the creativity side, it's really fascinating when you go, especially I've had a good fortune of working and living in America, and then also in the Far East as well. And from the Western side, we're so used to creativity being about brand new ideas. In Asia, they're much more comfortable with the idea of, partly it's actually comes from philosophical background, but actually taking things and remixing them. So something doesn't have to, and reworking something and changing things and taking one thing from one area and moving it to the other. And they're less hung up about having something to be completely new and novel in that sense.
Yeah, which is such a good point, because what is completely new and novel? We're all recycling. Yeah. So anyway,
going back to you as the writer now, like for your ideas, and where do you go for that inspiration?
Well, you know what? Something that I'm there's a lot of things that inspire me, and I do a lot of spiritual work. I'm really into, how do we make the world better, and how do we make sure that each person has a voice, even if their voice is different from another voice. I have a woman that I work with, and her name is Rosemary Musachio, and Rosemary was born with cerebral palsy. And according to Rosemary, when she lies down flat, all she can control is blinking her eyes. And so she has somebody that takes care of her around the clock. But so that just is part of Rosemary's reality. Other parts is that she's a brilliant writer. She's a chief accessibility officer. She's a leading mind in technology and making things fully accessible and innovative for people with disabilities. She's a terrific writer, a web developer. So, but when she communicates with a communications board that electronically speaks for her, and she has her phone set up in a different way. And so technology has allowed her voice to be heard, which is interesting. So things like that inspire me. But lately, what I'm really inspired by and is really firmly on my mind is the millennials. And I am a baby boomer generation in the United States. I'm the later, there's two segments of baby boomers in the U.S. There's the older one and then the last part. I am in the last part, but still I'm a baby boomer. And I have seen some troubling trends in the United States that where baby boomers are saying to millennials, oh, be quiet. We're not going away yet. Y'all go sit down. We'll tell you when you can, take over the world. And sometimes it's been really mean-spirited. For example, there's a special place in hell for women that don't vote women, or the only reason why millennial girls are following Bernie Sanders, just going into our little politics, was because it's where the boys are. And just some real... it's sort of some disparity going on that makes me uncomfortable, because what I'm seeing and who I'm starting to be the most inspired by are the millennials. And I'm writing my next book. I've already started. I love to write. And I will tell you this, James, when I didn't graduate from college, but I went to some courses in college, and I always wanted to write, and I wanted to be a journalist. And I had a professor tell me that I was one of the worst writers he'd ever met and that I should really change my degree because I would never be a writer. And I remember he crushed my soul at the time. He crushed me, but he was a professor. So obviously he knew more than I did. So it took me many years to really start writing. And I'm not saying I'm the best writer in the whole world, but I love to write. And I write probably like I talk. I believe in telling a story. I love stories.
And I'm sure what you just said, though, just there, that point about having a teacher or having a authority figure tell them, you can't write, you can't paint, you can't play this musical instrument as well. That really destroys people for a long period of time doing something. For you, what was it that kind of enabled you to kind of push through that and get that first book written and then get that first book published?
Well, what happened is every time I thought about it, it made me really mad.
Anger can be useful.
And I would think, how can you say that to a young person? How can you say that? But then I thought, because the more and more and more I had to write, because being in the corporations for so long, I had to write. And then I thought, I'm going to write a book. And so my first book was, and you can tell it's my first book. I don't want to apologize. I think I still have a little bit of, that in my head, that professor saying, you're a horrible writer, you're a horrible writer. But I didn't let it stop me. And I'll tell you, I don't believe in letting things stop me. If somebody presents me something negative or says, you can't do it, and I want to do it, I'm going to figure out a way to do it. I'm very stubborn that way. My father used to say that I was a very hard kid to raise, because if he would tell me I couldn't do it, I was just, even if I didn't want to do it, I was going to figure out a way to do it, because who are you to tell me I can't do something? Anyway, so it's like, it's a good thing. And maybe I've been told lately that I have some ADHD intensity going on, but we can label ourselves to all day long. But back to, so the millennials, I'm being so inspired lately by people like you, James, that are saying, how do I raise everybody's voice? How do I start these really important conversations and make sure that all these different voices can be heard? And how can we all contribute? How can we all contribute to society? And, how can we stop the professors like that guy I dealt with and say, and maybe, like you said, it takes years to say, oh, BS, I am not going to accept that I'm a bad writer. Who is he to say whether or not I'm a good writer or not? So I think working together and saying, I'm just not going to let things stop me. And I'm going to figure out a way to do it. Even when I first started my company, Tec-Access, I had so many people quickly telling me why I was not going to be successful. And I wasn't smart enough. You don't have a degree. You're a woman. You're not going to be successful in Virginia as a Caucasian woman without a Caucasian man. And just the rhetoric that people tell us. And saying, well, why would I be put on this earth with the ideas and the things that I do bring to the table, and even the things that I'm not good at, but I want to be better at them, like becoming writers and stuff like that. Nobody gets to tell me who I'm going to be. And so I'm going to look fear in the face and I'm going to walk right through it. And I'll say one more thing, James. I had a really good friend of mine and he wanted to start his own company. And he said, Debra, but I'm afraid I'll fail. I'm afraid that I'll cause my family to go broke. I'm afraid I'm not good enough. How'd you get over all your fears? I started laughing. I'm like, oh, I didn't. I just don't let them stop me. I just walk right into them. And, sometimes my stomach hurts, but I just am not going to. I'm not going to let anybody stop me, including myself.
Absolutely. And I heard a writer talking about the other day, a very successful writer, Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote a number of books and one of them made into a very successful movie called Eat, Pray, Love. And she talked about that fear always being on her shoulder, and when the fear comes in, either all those typical fears, you can't write, you're a terrible writer, you're too young, you're too old, all the usual ones. Someone's already had this idea but better. She said she just welcomes that little fear, almost like hello again, welcome back. Sorry, I don't have time for you just now. I need to write this next chapter in the book. Right. She makes very light. Has Sara in kind of inherited that grit and that stubbornness and that determination?
She has. And I'll just say, I love Elizabeth Gilbert's work. I love it. I love it. I love it. I started reading her book, Eat, Love, and Pray, and I savored it. It took me like months because I would allow myself like 2 or 3 pages a day. I loved it. So how cool. Sara has inherited that grit, and Sara challenges me all the time. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but one thing that's interesting about Sara, and I don't know if it's just her Down syndrome or part of it, Sara's a very unique individual, but Sara has a really good imagination. And so she will go into this imaginary world, and we speak all the time, and we're training all the time and stuff. So we'll be in social situations, and Sara will meet, these people, and she'll tell them that she's engaged. She's engaged to be married, and they'll get all excited and congratulate her, and she's beaming. Well, she isn't engaged to get married. And so it's funny because some of Sara's peers have autism, and so they'll look at her and they'll say, they've actually taken me to the side and said, why is Sara lying? And it's like, well, I know it looks like she's lying, but she's not lying, she's in this imaginary space when she's doing that. And it's a very creative space. And we've actually tapped into that to start writing a series of books where the main character in the book, children's books, is a person with Down syndrome. But I don't know if this play world, this imagination she has, is because of Down syndrome. Is it because it's Sarah? Is it a variety? So it's fascinating because she's very social. She's very good with people, but sometimes where is that line? And she has an intellectual disability. So do I need to push her here? Or is it the disability? She really challenges me constantly.
You mentioned also ADD, ADHD as well. I was at a conference recently, and it was all entrepreneurs. There was probably about 1,000 people in the room, and someone asked, "Please put your hand up if you believe." And they did a series of questions. And something like 3/4 of the room still had their hands up at the end of it. Said, well, all those questions I've just asked, like, give it highly likely that you may have ADD or ADHD. And I see it also with a lot of musicians. And there's a very interesting thing called synesthesia, where some musicians or very creative people can almost see the notes and feel the notes like a tactile thing. So it's all these little, it's very grey. It's all these little gradations of things as well. I just want to kind of pull you back on this as well. In this journey that you've had, you've gone through some, this incredible creative journey as a mother, as an entrepreneur, as an advocate. Tell us about a time when you worked on something and you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out like you'd hoped. And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Great. You really are great at this, James. The one that the one that hurt the most was when Tec-Access started failing, because Tec-Access was, it was an up and down journey, curves and sideways. I remember being in bed at 3:00 in the morning and not knowing how I was going to pay payroll in 2 days. And that's just because you're impacting other people's lives. But whenever our financial crisis, it happened certainly in the States, and then we created it throughout the rest of the world. But the small bank that I was with here in Virginia failed. The regulators stepped in and they ceased operations, and they called my note. $200,000 note was due overnight, and I didn't have it. And they said, well, go and borrow it from another bank. Well, banks weren't lending money to small businesses. They're really not really doing it that well these days. And I understand it, by the way, because small businesses, especially, a lot of businesses fail. The numbers are staggering how many businesses fail. So I remember trying to save it, doing everything I could think of to save it. And I wanted to save my employees, because most of my employees, over 70%, were people with disabilities. 7 million Americans had been laid off. It was not a good place to be laid off in that environment at the time. And there was an event that happened, and I realized it was over, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And really consciously understanding that we were going on a slide and I couldn't stop it. And I wound up, it was a pretty traumatic failure to me. There were a lot of people that lost money. The good news is I saved every one of my employees. Every one of my employees, we merged with another company, and the company that absorbed every one of the employees, including myself. Some people lost money. I lost the most. But I remember a friend and coach saying to me about 3 or 4 months into it, do you think you could ever forgive yourself? And I'm like, well, this family lost money and this person lost money. He said, yeah, my point is, do you think you can ever get to the point where you can forgive yourself, Debra? And I did. I still, I would prefer that didn't happen, but the lessons I learned from it, I could never trade them. It was beautiful lessons, and I'm a much, much better business owner and entrepreneur now. I'm also a much better strategist walking that. And you know what? The number one thing that I learned, James, is that when I do not listen to my gut, when I don't listen to my body, my stomach, my feelings, when I don't listen and I know not to do A, and I do B instead because maybe practically B makes more sense, but all my instincts are telling me that I'm making the wrong decision, but I do it anyway. I did a lot of that, not trusting myself with Tec-Access. But I've learned now that if I don't feel good about making a decision or a choice, I will not do it. If my stomach hurts and everybody tells me it's the most logical decision, but I don't feel it, I won't do it anymore. So that's one really powerful thing I've learned. I listen to my instincts.
And part of that, listening to your instinct, listening to your gut, I'm sure is made up of you having made lots and lots of decisions, before that point, and getting better at making decisions, and just you almost you see it when people are creating, whether they're artists or musicians, or when they're really in that flow state, they're not really thinking. The thinking part has stopped. Really, they're just
Right.
Absolutely focused on what they're doing, and all those years of experience, trial and error, good and bad, come into it, and you have that kind of instinct, that gut feeling. This is the direction I should go. Tell us about, on this creative journey you've had, any insights or light bulb moments, points where you've said, okay, this is the direction I need to be going. This is a distinction I've just kind of understood. I've just recognized.
Yeah, I think that question goes back to what you so eloquently said, really the gut check, because even right now, I was so blessed to get invited to speak before the General Assembly of the United Nations. I was so excited and I was terrified. Even though I do this all the time, I thought, oh, don't mess up. So I'm like, stop it. So I'm like having this, obviously crazy moment with myself, but I get up on the stage and I'm listening to the other amazing speakers, and I'm listening to some of them quote chapter and verse of laws and stuff. And I thought, I don't want to do that. And I know that I have all these country representatives, but I'm just going to speak from the heart and I'm just going to try to be authentic. And so I did. I just went to that place and I just spoke from the heart, and it really, the energy shifted, and you could feel the whole energy shift in the room. And then the countries, instead of making these statements about who they are, they really started engaging. And so I think this journey that I've taken, the missteps, the mistakes, the successes, having a real authentic journey. And we say that sometimes. I think it's easy to talk about having an authentic journey, but I really am doing it. And what I think is interesting, the more that I take that authentic journey, the more my body, my soul, it won't let me get away with as much as I used to be able to get away with. And for example, there's something that's happening in my work right now, and I can go in two different directions. And one direction, it makes sense monetarily, but I don't want to go that direction. And the other one, it's more risky and more innovative and entrepreneurial, and it feels like I feel lighter when I think about it. So for the last few weeks, I've sort of been shifting more to the one with the monetary, and my body and my sleeping, it is raising Cain with me. So it's almost like now that my soul, my spirit, my body, all of it together knows what the rules are, I can't pretend I don't know the rules. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
absolutely. I mean, I think you have to listen to that because it's based upon something very, 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 very deep. And obviously, you're now kind of giving advice and helping corporate leaders and NGOs. But what's the best advice that you've ever received about living a creative life and living a happy life?
Well, that's another great question. And I would say that my father has passed over and I miss him, but he always told me that I could do whatever I wanted. And the only person that was going to get in my way was myself. And I remember when he was telling me that as a kid, I bought it. But then when I became a teenager, I wasn't really sure. I thought, oh, he loves me. So, and I didn't always have a perfect relationship with my father, or, I sometimes, it was a very dynamic, sometimes troubling relationship, but I remembered him saying that. And so to me, that's the best thing that I was ever told, that no matter who you are capable of fulfilling the dreams that you have. If you have those dreams, there's a reason why. Now, maybe the dreams aren't going to look exactly like, I mean, I thought with Tec-Access, for example, it was a technology company. I was going to grow it to a multi-million-dollar business, which I did. I was going to sell it for a cajillion dollars. Many, many people with disabilities were going to get help and employed. It wound up being a different path, but not a bad path. I really love the path that I'm on. So having, really trusting in your process and understanding that it's not a straight line. You're going to veer to the left and the right, and you're going to sometimes just have to totally, release everything and believe in the power of the intelligent universe. And I'll tell you one more thing, James. Understanding that wisdom is not only the gift of older people, but some of the greatest teachers are children with disabilities, people of different nationalities. Wisdom and creativeness and innovative, it is not limited to just one segment of the population, one age. Some of my greatest wisdom has come from younger people and younger people with disabilities. I'm just fascinated by human beings.
Absolutely. And before we came on, we were just talking about being at, I was at a family event at the weekend there. And one thing you do realize when you're around, especially younger children, is this idea of being present, being, in the moment in what you're doing, not thinking forward, not thinking back, but actually being present in what you're doing just now and giving it, kind of 100%, whether that is building a sandcastle or building a business as well. You're known for being a real technology person. So do you have any online resources, tools, or apps like Evernote that you absolutely love using?
Well, I do love Evernote, and I, as you had said before, I'm very big on social media. I love social media. I will tell you that I have to be careful with social media. Maybe that's that ADHD part of me, but it can really absorb me and take me out of the moment, back to the point that you were just making. But I like a lot of different tools, like Evernote, but I use like Audacity for a lot of the podcasts and the recordings and stuff that I'm doing. And I recently, about 2 years ago, went to the Mac side from Windows, and I'd always been a Windows user, and I love the creativeness of the Mac and all of the tools that you can use, including some of the social media tools like Buffer. And I love all the new apps and how they all work together. And but there's so many that sometimes you're like, I'm getting overwhelmed by the volume of it. So knowing what to use, but Evernote's definitely one that I really enjoy using. And I like how you can pick up on the keywords and stuff. Sorry.
Here's possibly an even more difficult question then. If you could only recommend one book and one record, one album to our listeners, what would they be? Well,
I like some of the old stuff. And you brought up Elizabeth Gilbert's, but I'm serious. I loved Eat, Love, and Pray. I just thought that was such a profound story. So I'm going to go with that because that was one of my favorite books. I'm an avid reader, so I'm reading a lot of different things, but I loved that one. But an album, any of the Moody Blues. I came to the Moody Blues later in life. My husband loved them for years, but I love their music. I think it's very beautiful, and I think it's very transcending. So
great. We'll put those on if people go to jamestaylor.me, you'll get all the show notes, everything we've been talking about today. You'll be able to get all the links for these as well. So final question for you, Debra. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you have are the tools of your trade, your computer, maybe those kind of tools, and you've also got the knowledge that you've acquired over these years as an entrepreneur, as an advocate, as a strategist, but you know no one knows who you are. How would you restart things? I feel like I have done partially that in the past with some of the journeys I've been on, but I would, as long as I have my computer, I would get on social media, and I believe in being a positive voice on social media. And I would get on and I would start, talking about, what can we do to make the world a better place? And I would engage with other people, and I would get my thoughts out there, and I would learn from other leaders, but I would go to social media. I love social media. I know there's a lot of bad things on social media, but I believe that it has tremendous value to really help spread good.
So that's what I would do.
Awesome. Well, Debra, thanks so much for coming on the show today. What is the best way that listeners can connect with you, learn more about the different programs and different things that you're involved in?
Well, you can go to my website, which is ruhglobal.com, RUH global.com. And on almost any social media medium, I'm Debra Ruh, DebraRuh, DeBruh. And very big on Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and LinkedIn and Facebook, and use those tools in different ways to sort of broaden not only my message, but help broadcast what other people are doing too, so that we can share others' work as well as not only just mine.
Well, Debra, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today and hearing about the incredible work that you're doing. I wish you all the best with this book and also the next book, which sounds like you're in the process of writing for millennials. Have a great day.
Thank you, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.